Hello again. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Spiritism, a closer look, evolution. This is being transmitted through Kardec Radio, so thank you very much for joining us and participating with us. We're going to start tonight's program, as always, talking about last week's Spirit Trivia. So let's just get to it. Spirit Trivia, as you know by now, is our weekly question or quiz, if you will. And we really encourage you to participate and cast your answers. We don't collect any information from you. It's just a way of, creating an atmosphere of learning and participating with us. So let's just go for last programs. This is our program number 11. The Spirit Trivia that you see here is from our last program, number 10. So that was the question. Which of the following attributes is acquired when the intelligent principle enters the human kingdom? It's a very interesting question. So we discussed this at length, I would say, last time. So just recapping before we can get to the answer. If we follow through the kingdoms, mineral kingdom has a basic important attribute, which is attraction, the ability to create attraction between molecules and atoms and subatomic particles and everything. So mineral kingdom, attraction. Vegetable plants kingdom, sensation, the ability that those living organisms have to sense sunlight and day, night, and stuff like that. That is acquired at the plants kingdom. Next one, animal kingdom. Animal kingdom. So what is the main factor acquired by the intelligent principle? Instinct. Instinct. Animals, as we know it, actually as we see a lot of that on wild, programs that show all the savannah and everything else, and we see a lot of instinct. We have our dogs and cats. We see the same thing. It's a kind of an easy thing to perceive, I would say. So instinct comes at the animal kingdom. So what was the thing about humans, human kingdom? What do we gain? What is the biggest attribute acquired by the intelligent principle when we get to that point? Reason. Reason is the main one. In general, we say reason, free will, and thought. Those three are the big ones, but reason is the main one. Reason totally differentiates us from the previous kingdom, the animal kingdom. So reason, thought, and free will. So if we look at the question here, what attribute is acquired when the intelligent principle enters the human kingdom? So first option, instinct and free will, no, because instinct comes from the animal kingdom. Thought and attraction, no, because attraction is at the mineral kingdom. Reason and free will, that would be the one, right? Free will and sensation, no, because sensation comes with the plants kingdom. So actually the correct answer, and all of the above is not, because not all of them are right. So actually the answer is reason and free will. Those things are acquired by the intelligent principle when it enters the human kingdom. If you have not been following us, or if you want to go back and look at some of our programs, you can go back to Kardec Radio. We have been talking a lot about the intelligent principle and things that are surrounding to that spiritual principle, material principle. So we really encourage you to go back if you're not following us. So that was Spirit Trivia for our last program. On our last program, we closed the subject kingdoms. Now we're going to go into the next subject, which I would call races. It's a challenging thing. Races is, I would say, it's one of these things that it leaves so many questions. It raises actually so many questions. And we got this book here, On the Way to the Light by Spirit Emmanuel. Okay, that's probably the best reference for studying races and Spiritism. We're going to get to this book next week because we are going to kind of prepare for studying at length what is being published on this book. It's incredible. It's very interesting, a lot of information, and believe me, you don't want to miss that. So let's talk about races a little bit before we actually go into the four main races that started many years ago. Spirit Emmanuel tells us that there are several different cycles in life. The planet has cycles. Everything in life are progressive cycles. That's really what evolution is, right? Progressive cycles. And for example, day and night, cycles of day and night, the four periods of the year, the four seasons of the year, same thing. Those are all cycles, but there are some cycles that are very long, much longer than the average incarnated life. So it's hard to detect and say. So Emmanuel comes to explain to us something that we need to pay attention. Very interesting. He tells us there's a cycle of 520,000 years. Yeah, 520,000 years. And he divides that in two parts, two halves. So two parts of 260,000 years. The first part he calls the period of activity. That's how he names it. And the second part he calls the period of rest. He does not provide any information on this second period, rest, so we don't know anything about it. But on the first period, the first half activity, he provides quite the reasonable information, actually very interesting information. And that's what we want to get to today. Okay, we want to cover this a little bit. He tells us that the period of activity, again, 260,000 years, is divided, as you see here on your screen. The initial period of 64,000 years, followed by 7 consecutive periods of 28,000 years. If you do the math, 64,000 plus 7 times 28,000, you will get to 260,000 years. Okay? So let's see what they're saying here. If we go back and start to analyze this, what is Emmanuel telling us with all of this here? Okay, let's take a deep look into this thing. First of all, if these are progressive cycles, where am I? Where are we now in the cycle? Are we close to the beginning? Are we in the middle? Are we close to the end of the period? We are about 3/4 of the way. Okay, so we are about 3/4 of the way from the initial 260,000 years and through the cycle. Well, let's put some markers here so it makes a little more sense to us, right? The current cycle that we are in started in approximate, these are approximate numbers, of course, started 200,000 years before Christ. And if you do the math, 260,000 years, you will end on the year 60,000, of course, after Christ. And here we have the breakdowns for all these 7 periods. We're going to briefly look at those and pull out some of the information that was provided by Emmanuel. So first thing, Emmanuel gives us names to these periods so he can refer to this in words per se. So the first 64,000 years is what he calls the beginnings of future life. And everything else that comes after that, the 7 consecutive periods of 28,000 years each, it's called a race. Races have names. We're going to go through this in a minute. So we have 7 races following the initial period of 64,000 years called the beginnings of future life, meaning preparation for life, for future life. Again, the current period starts on the year 200,000 BC, and that's when the Neanderthal or Homo sapiens come online. Remember, if you have not following us, you can go back to our programs where we explain about the anthropoids, which is the transition from animals to humans. It's all explained. There's a lot of information in there. So the first humans are the Neanderthal, and they started living on Earth, their first human lives, on the year approximate 200,000 BC, before Christ. Okay? All right, so let's go through this one by one, period by period. Again, 64,000 years, initial beginnings of future life. Then the first race, 28,000 years, Emmanuel does not have a name for that. Next period, 28,000 years, another race, unnamed. He will not refer to a name for that race. Now comes the third race, and he gives us a name. Third race, the Lemurians. And actually not much more than just telling us a name, because the name wouldn't really mean anything. But he will provide some characteristics of that race, of that period of time. So those incarnated humans, right, had to go through a process in the spirit world. Okay, remember the 64,000 initial years. This is all being worked out up there in the spiritual world. So the Lemurian race displays a stabilization of body, form, and soul. Okay, so you see the first 64,000 years plus the 2 first races will allow for work being done on the spirit world until we get to a stable body, a stable form, which is our main form, 2 legs, 2 arms, and so, and how the soul manipulates that body. So that only happened approximately, if you look at the timeline in the bottom, 80,000 BC. Okay, then Lemurian race. Then the next race, another 28,000 years, called Atlantis. And what was the main thing about the Atlantis race? You see, stabilization of body, form, and soul, that was a thing of the past. That already happened, okay, thousands of years before. With the Atlantis race, what comes in place is the inferior materiality. So these are people, not worried about spirituality, nothing like this. They're living a material life in its very beginnings. That's why Emmanuel uses the word inferior, okay, inferior materiality. Then the next rate comes up, and that is where we are. Okay, we are between 24,000 BC and 4,000 after Christ. This race is called the Aryans, and the Aryans, they show up total predominance of the intellect. So intellectual predominance is the key here for the Aryans, something that was not really emphasized before. It started with the Aryans, and still with us. I don't think anybody, doubts that the intellectual development that we have had, especially in the last 200 years, is incredible. Okay. All right. So after this race that we are part of, that will end at about the year 4,000, we're going to have 2 more races. A new race from 28,000 years, from 4,000 to approximately 32,000, and then the last race before this half period of activity closes. Okay, so we have some references here. We need to we need to understand a little bit more about these things. So let's go for a more interesting analysis here. Think about ourselves. So we are in the year, say, we are in this 28,000 years here for the Aryans, right? If you look back to Neanderthal, our body today is not the same as theirs. It's completely different. They are still, their arms are still on an inside position, a lot of hair. They're very short people. Their brain is 4 times smaller than ours. The teeth are completely different than ours. The type of nose and ear and type of nose and eyes and ears, it's different. It's just different. They are kind of far away from what we are today. And if that's the case, and this is the key to all of the study here, if that's the case, the DNA that the Neanderthal carried is not the same as ours. It can't be, otherwise we would be just like them, or they would be like us. So at one point between when they started 200,000 years ago and today, there was at least one, maybe more, but at least one DNA transition, because we're not the same. And when we go through all the Spiritist literature, plus including scientific literature, it becomes very interesting. There was a DNA change just before the Aryan race came on board. So the Aryan race starts at about 24,000 BC. So a little bit prior to that, there was a DNA change. The physical body became different. Of course, this is it doesn't happen just like this. It's not a snap of fingers. It's a process, but it became evident before the Aryans. So at the time this thing was discovered, this new body changed names because it was no longer a Neanderthal, so it was called Cro-Magnon. We don't use that name anymore in science, but that was the original name at the time. So this DNA, this body, had to be different from the Neanderthal. So now there's something interesting here for us to think. I go by analogy, usually do this analogy. If I give you, for example, a very simple car, let's say a Beetle, okay, the Volkswagen Beetle, and I tell you, go to the highway and put all the speed you can. And let's just say that I can do, for all purposes, let's just say that I can do 100 miles an hour on the freeway. Then you say, well, I'm going to take you in the same car. I'm going to put you on an F1 circuit, okay, an F1 circuit, Formula One, and you do everything you can. I'm going to do the same 100 miles because more than that, I just don't feel comfortable. And then you can tell me, well, maybe the limitation is on the car. So instead of giving you a VW Beetle, I'm going to give you a real Formula One car. And you get on it and you put all the speed that you can. Most likely I'm going to do 100 miles an hour because the limitation is not on the physical part, which is the machine, the car. The limitation is in the intelligent principle. I can only do 100 miles an hour. Some people can do maybe 200. Some people can do 300. I can only do 100 miles an hour. So giving me a better machine, a more elaborated machine, is not going to make me pass that limit, because the limit is not on the physical parts. The limit is not material. The limit is the intelligent principle. If you switch the intelligent principle, get me out of the car, put another pilot, a professional pilot, things are going to change. Because with the same car that I can only do 100 miles an hour, he's going to do 300 miles an hour. So it's very similar to what happens here. If we have now a better DNA, if we have a more robust, more erect body, I can bring in a better intelligent principle, a more developed intelligent principle to operate this machine or this physical body. And that's exactly what happened. In order to operate these new machines, or in order to incarnate in new, more developed physical bodies, we could bring in, and it was done exactly that way. We had to bring in intelligent principles that were more developed than the ones that were here. Otherwise, we would have stayed as Neanderthal to this day. And that wasn't the case. So we kind of, if you will, quotes, imported spirits, more advanced spirits to help us here and operate more advanced bodies. And that's where this exiles of Capella come in place. This is something we're going to explain later, maybe not even on the next meeting, maybe on the next 2 meetings from today. But anyway, these exiles of Capella means in about that time, 25,000 BC, Capella is another constellation, and they had an orb that was going through more or less what the Earth was going through, and they were developing. Of course, they were better than us in terms of intelligence, in terms of morality, and in terms of physicality. They were better than us in all three. But for the Capella standards, morally, there were several spirits that were millions of spirits that were not really as advanced as they should have been. So what happened is, for the orb, in order for the orb to continue developing morally, these guys had to be sent somewhere else. These spirits had to be sent somewhere else. Jesus was called in and said, would you take these people, take them back to Earth, because they need a place to continue their development. It's just that Capella became inadequate for the purpose. So we can take them to another place where they are going to still be more advanced than the existing population or the existing spirits, and they will help those spirits to be better physically, morally, and intellectually. And at the same time, you kill two birds with a stone. At the same time, they will have the opportunity to develop themselves, do good things, and then recoup from what they were lacking and go back home to Capella. That was the global idea, the general idea. So Jesus said, oh yeah, I need them, because I need to make, I need better spirits on earth to help develop the morality on the planet. So these spirits start little by little to incarnate on earth, and that's how the whole thing happens. That's how we're going to explain next week. So stay with us, don't miss it, by the way. Anyhow, they start coming little by little. And there was a point where Jesus said, well, this is working well. Things are going well. We have a new DNA in place. We have a more, a better physical structure of a body. We have a better intellect. We have more morality than before, right? And I want the rest of these spirits from Capella. I want them all. Whatever you have left, send over here, because it's really beneficial for us on Earth. So the last batch comes in at once, and several thousands of spirits come on board, and that takes place at about 4000 BC. That's what is called that's the idea behind Adam, the first man in classic Bible thinking. So Adam, or the idea behind it, represents a huge group of spirits incarnated on earth, coming from somewhere else with a more developed, more advanced, intelligent principle that will help us. And that's, you see, this event, when you read the Spiritist literature, it has different names. Some people call Lost Paradise, Fallen Angels, Fallen Paradise. And the names, when you look at these names, they're not really very positive. They're kind of, those names are not really, they they carry some negativity in them. And why is that? Well, think about this. Think that you have what you have today, okay? So you have your life, you have your things and everything else. And then let's say your boss, he calls you and says, listen, we're going to open up a new place and you're going to be in charge of that place. And you're leaving tomorrow and here's your ticket. And where's that place? In the middle of the desert in Africa, let's say, for example. Well, what happens when you get there? The first thing you're going to miss is, well, where's my car? Where are my stores? Where are the supermarkets that I go all the time? There's nothing like this. And then you go down to, more critical things like there's not a toilet, there's nothing. This is completely different than what I'm used to. And then you get to a point where you say to yourself, I was in paradise and I didn't realize that. I was in paradise and didn't see that. That's the idea behind the lost paradise, these fallen angels, because these people, they were in a much better place. They could have been in a much better position, but because of their lack of moral compared to the standards of Capella, please be sure you understand this, right? Because of their toughness in terms of morality, they had to be sent somewhere else. And now they're missing their home. So they are kind of, I was in paradise and I didn't know. But anyway, going back here to our general line of thought. Adam, the idea behind Adam is it represents a large group of spirits mostly coming from another place called Capella, and with the purpose of helping us on earth to be better physically, intellectually, and morally. And that's what they did, and it worked. It worked. If you look back, just try to imagine 20,000 years ago. We can barely imagine 4,000 years ago with Abraham and Moses and all the fathers with Abraham. We barely imagine the conditions they lived in. So can you imagine 20,000 years? And can you imagine you today? So yes, there was a difference. So we did need this more advanced, intelligent principle here to help us grow. And it worked. That's the interesting part. Okay, so for next week, what we wanted to do is what happens when these exiles of Capella start incarnating on Earth? How did it happen? Where do they go? What do they do? How do they behave? Okay, how do they populate the planet per se? Okay, so that's what we're gonna try to accomplish next week. I urge you to be here with us to, don't miss it. Don't miss it. Okay, we have some notes here from Cida. So she's asking for our prayers for his father in Brazil. Actually, not father, I'm sorry, her husband. So Cida, yes, we'll do a little prayer later tonight for your husband. Thanks for the name and the place he is. We'll consider this and we'll do a prayer later for you, okay? All right, so as always, don't forget, Spirit Trivia. Go to evolution.spirittrivia.com and you're going to see there's a question or a trivia for tonight, right, for what we discussed tonight. And it's already active. I just did as I'm speaking with you right now. I just activated the trivia. So go there, participate, cast your vote. Once again, I really make sure that you understand. This is completely 100% anonymous. We do not collect names, email addresses, anything from you, IP addresses, computer references, nothing. It's just a a way of us all participating and learning so we can discuss the question and the possible answers on our next program next week. Thanks for watching us. This was Spiritism, A Closer Look, Evolution, program number 11. I'll see you next time. Good night.